Always from the heart of the city, and now on demand 24/7 on the CHFI website. This is the soundtrack to accompany some junk. And I'm Don Jackson, around the world on the internet. And I, to my motorcycle parked like the soul of the junkyard restored, a bicycle fleshed with power, and tore off up Highway 106, continually drunk on the wind in my mouth, ringing the handlebar for speed, wild to be wreckage forever. James Dickey from Cherry Log Road, written in 1963. And this, a quote from Coventry Patmore from some centuries back. He had put within his reach a box of counters and a red-veined stone, a piece of glass abraded by the beach, and 6 or 7 shells, a bottle with bluebells, and 2 French copper coins ranged there with careful art to comfort his sad heart. And it is those things we carry with us into adulthood, whether or not the actual treasures make the journey with us. And we continue to collect our treasures throughout our lives and keep them in a place that is even better for safekeeping. Charlotte Bronte wrote, "The heart has hidden treasures, in secret kept, in silence sealed." But sometimes we need to make room. That's when we need the services of the junk man. Some junk this hour for Lovers and Other Strangers from iTunes and CHFI.com. Jann Arden, heading off to where no one knows her. And, of course, on a midnight train to Georgia, Gladys Knight, Lovers and Other Strangers from iTunes and CHFI.com. He even gave up his old car in order to make that trip to Georgia. Someone once said that one person's junk is another person's treasure, and that is so true. If you watch the deals being made at a neighborhood garage or yard sale, then you'll agree. The signs go up a few days in advance, and on the day of the sale, parking is at a premium on the street. Have you been to any yard sales this summer? My wife went to one down the street and bought me a great book on gardens. All the proceeds from this garage sale were going to help fund a run for breast cancer. So she not only bought more things for our property, but also gave them a monetary donation. I also ran across this in the Farmer's Calendar for the month of August in the 06 Old Farmer's Almanac, written by Castle Freeman Jr. He writes, and I quote, "You have seen during yard sales the forlorn little collections of articles piled at the roadsides with a crude sign propped against them, 'Free.' These are the unsold remainders of the long day's effort at household commerce. They are the lowest, poorest bottom of the unwanted. You might find a ratty recliner, an old vacuum tube radio that was last heard from in 1957, a single bicycle tire, flat, a box of old National Geographics, mildewed. Days will pass, the rain will fall, and the free pile will sit there, undiminished. At last, the would-be seller will give up and cart the articles off to the dump. You can't give this stuff away, but it has always seemed to me to be a mistake to try to dispose of the useless by taking it out of the market entirely. After all, how much more abject is the junk in the free pile than the junk that has been successfully sold around and beside it. Not much more, I suggest. The astute seller, rather than trying to give away his remnants, would put up a sign advertising them for, say, $1. He would assign them not much value, but value nonetheless. Unquote. Crassel Freeman Jr. goes on to suppose, and again I quote, "My guess is they'd move. Unaccountably, people will accept for a price what they disdain for nothing. In the sea of the free pile and the yard sale, the ship of supply and demand sails into shoal waters." Unquote. Castle Freeman Jr., a wonderful article from the '06 Old Farmer's Almanac. But we don't always want to get rid of all the junk that clutters up our lives. Lovers and Other Strangers from iTunes and CHFI.com. Bob Seger, Against the Wind, Rod Stewart with These Foolish Things, and Paul McCartney with A Little Junk. Lovers and Other Strangers from iTunes and CHFI.com. This is an excerpt from the '03 edition of the Friendship Book of Francis Gay, published by D.C. Thompson and Company. Gay writes, and I quote, "My American friend Wilma keeps a box on her dresser into which she puts favorite quotations. She also keeps small trinkets there and a beautiful marble given to her by her son. When she has problems or feels in need of inspiration, she reaches into the box and takes something out. Whatever it happens to be, it somehow puts her in touch with her own wisdom. It seems a delightful idea, and one we could all adopt. Now, what would you choose to put into your inspiration box?" Unquote. Not all of us get to keep our most prized possessions after show and tell. Some are lost due to a whole host of reasons and are forgotten. But miracles do happen. Miracles that are life-changing. A program like this really can't be complete without a mention of the French romantic comedy Amélie that starred Audrey Tautou. The lead character is a little odd, but her heart is in the right place as she sets out to help strangers find happiness. In the process, she finds love. It all begins with a loose tile behind her bathroom sink. She removes it and finds a child's treasure hidden away, a box filled with trinkets from a time long since past. She very easily could have tossed the box into the trash, but she's intrigued by the keepsakes of another. She decides to find the little boy, obviously now a man, who had squirreled away his most precious treasures. The search takes up a good first portion of the film, but eventually she succeeds in tracking down the treasure's rightful owner. He is now a man who is locked into a routine. He's had a falling out with his daughter, and is a grandfather to a child he doesn't really know. Amélie doesn't want to just hand the box over. She wants to create a little mystery surrounding their discovery. She leaves the box in a phone booth just before the man walks by. The phone rings, and when he steps into the booth, he discovers a part of his past. He is moved to tears at the gesture and looks around for the person who has found these most precious reminders of his youth. The discovery completely changes his life. He mends the rift between his daughter and himself and takes an active role in his grandchild's life. Amelie has discovered her life's purpose and vows to work her magic in people's lives behind the scenes. In French with English subtitles, it is well worth a first look, even a second or third, to see what she does to that mean-spirited grocery store owner. But ultimately, it is a film about kindness and love. Ogmandino from The Choice, published by Bantam, wrote, "The greatest legacy we can leave our children is happy memories. Those precious moments, so much like pebbles on the beach, that are plucked from the sand and placed in tiny boxes that lie undisturbed on tall shelves until one day they spill out and time repeats itself with joy and sweet sadness in the child, now an adult. Memories. Love's best preservative." Ogmandino from The Choice, published by Bantam. I'm Don Jackson. From iTunes and CHFI.com. Chicago remembering old days, and Fergie and Big Girls Don't Cry. Welcome back to the accumulated junk of Lovers and Other Strangers from iTunes and CHFI.com. And for those who listen at a great distance, we've just come through a strike here in Toronto that had our garbage piling up for quite some time, and the cleanup has finally begun. That's the kind of junk we are relieved to see disappear. I like to visit antique stores and used bookstores. What are some antique stores, really, than just a garage sale indoors? Occasionally, though, you will find a treasure. Antiquarian booksellers also fascinate me. As it said in the column 2003 Consumer Tastes and Trends from the 03 edition of the Old Farmer's Almanac, compiled by Christine Schultz, and I quote, "The value is rising on plain, old-fashioned stuff you find at flea markets," says Terry Covell, co-author with her husband of Covell's Antiques and Collectibles Price List. If there's any hot sector, it's age of industry items that document a way of life that's gone and that don't have their own stores in cyberspace yet. One example, electric fans. The ones you can buy today bear little or no resemblance to the old rickety one I had in my old bedroom growing up. Irons, slide rules, early manual or electric typewriters, IBM Selectrics, can draw $100. Early models can command $5,000. Unquote. If you read an early blog of mine, then you know I have my father's old Remington typewriter that I just can't part with, more for sentimental reasons than anything else. I'm sure you have an attic that might be filled with stuff from past generations that you can't part with. Again, for sentimental reasons, a tie to the past that you're not quite ready to cut. But most of the garage sales or yard sales that I've been to, rarely if ever, have the kind of stuff for sale that will ever be worth any real amount of money. But you never know. Maybe this time. Maybe that's why we're so eager to go through another's junk. Lovers and Other Strangers. From iTunes and CHFI.com. I'm Don Jackson with Lovers and Other Strangers from iTunes and CHFI.com. As I mentioned, I like to visit used bookstores and antiquarian booksellers. That's my passion. Old books that have been lovingly cared for. I've had to take over the whole basement of our house for an office and a library. Carol Wolper from Los Angeles magazine wrote, and I quote, "Here's how I learned the art of traveling light. During a particularly bad time in my life, I had to put my stuff in storage and move in with a friend. All I could think about was how great it would be when I was resettled and could get it back. This stuff assumed a level of major importance until 8 months later when I got my own place. On reopening those boxes, I thought, what was I thinking? Not only have I gotten along just fine without all this, I can't figure out why I was so attached to it in the first place." Carol Wolper from Los Angeles magazine. And a truth about junk. Lovers and Other Strangers from iTunes and CHFI.com. The Beatles and Yesterday, and Sheryl Crow with Sting, Always on Your Side. This is a poem by Carl Sandburg. It's called The Junk Man. I am glad God saw death and gave death a job taking care of all who are tired of living. When all the wheels in a clock are worn and slow, and the connections are loose, and the clock goes on ticking and telling the wrong time from hour to hour, and people around the house joke about what a bum clock it is, how glad the clock is when the big junk man drives his wagon up to the house and puts his arms around the clock and says, "You don't belong here. You gotta come along with me." How glad the clock is then when it feels the arms of the junk man close around it and carry it away. Finally, this hour, George Bernard Shaw wrote, "I want to be used up when I die. Life is no brief candle to me. It is a sort of splendid torch, which I have got hold of for a moment, and I want to make it burn as brightly as possible before handing it on to future generations." Lovers and Other Strangers from iTunes and CHFI.com. Good night, sweet dreams. I'm Don Jackson.